got a branch line to call his very own. He's the really useful and truly adored. He's the one. He's the one. He's the really useful engine that we adore. He's the one. He's the number one. Thomas the Tank Engine.
Gosh dang, that movie was incredible. This is the best Thomas movie I have ever seen. Nothing can top this one. Nothing. Oh, hello, what's this? Sodor's Legend of the Lost Treasure, huh? Well, let's give this a watch and see if it's better than The Adventure Begins. I highly doubt not, since this is the best Thomas movie I've ever seen. I can't decide which movie is better.
Good morning, everybody. This is the TSMU fan here, and today we will be reviewing what is, in my opinion, the second best Thomas movie of all time, Sodor's Legend of the Lost Treasure, the third movie to be animated by ARC Productions, and the third movie written by Andrew Brenner. Sorry that this one took a bit of a long time to come out. As I've said before, I get sidetracked both with other video projects and stuff in real life that I just couldn't get to working on this video. But anyways, without further ado, let's get this review underway. The plot of this movie is that a new branch line is being built to Harwick on the island of Sodor, and Sir Topham Hatt sends for a new, bigger tank engine called Ryan to help build the line. However, after Thomas has an accident while shunting Gordon's express coaches, Sir Topham Hatt decides to send Thomas instead, while Ryan takes over on his branch line. This of course makes Thomas jealous and tries to prove that he is the better engine, only to end up missing the danger signs and falling into a sinkhole at the building site. He uncovers an old ship that was hidden by a pirate called Captain Callie's many years ago, and the ship is lifted out and docked at Arlesburg Harbor. However, an older man named Sailor John spies Thomas getting lifted out of the sinkhole and thinks that there is a treasure to be found buried on the island somewhere. He gets help from Thomas, who sneaks away from his jobs at the building site every night to see him. Meanwhile, Mary and the steam shovel find something buried in the rocks at the building site and bumps into Thomas, revealing that she had found the treasure. Sir Topham Hatt wants to put the treasure in a museum, but Sailor John wants to keep it all for himself. This leads to Sailor John blowing up Sir Topham Hatt's office at Knapford Station and stealing the treasure. Thomas chases after Sailor John to try and stop him and Skiff from getting away, Skiff being Sailor John's sailboat on wheels. The chase ends with Thomas plunging into the sea at Arlesburg Harbor as Sailor John and Skiff sail away. A wave washes over them and Sailor John loses the treasure. The next morning, Sailor John is found by the Sodor police and arrested, while Thomas is craned out of the water, and Sir Topham Hatt praises him for being such a hero. And while Thomas didn't save the treasure, Sir Topham Hatt tells him that his engines are worth more than any treasure, and that he will always be number one. Later, the new branch line is opened, the treasure is refound by divers, and Thomas meets up with Skiff, who is now owned by a new captain named Captain Joe, who isn't seen in this movie. Skiff now gives railboat tours around Arlesburg Harbor, and he and Thomas watch as the fireworks go off to celebrate the line's opening. Now, let's of course start off with the bad things that were in this special, because this special is a really good one, but of course, it isn't perfect. As I said before in my Tale of the Brave review, the proper way to handle fan service characters is to not show them immediately, but have a build up to their introduction and have them play an important part in the movie's plot. Tale of the Brave does this pretty well with Bill and Ben, as they're the ones who save Thomas from the landslide at the beginning of the movie, and they have some really nice interactions with the other characters in that movie. I cannot say the same thing for Donald and Douglas in this special, who returned after being absent from the show for several years, their last appearance being in the episode Saved You from season 12. Now I do really appreciate that they brought them back in this special, and the episode in season 20, Love Me Tender, where they finally get the spotlight, is a very good episode for them. But I will say that they weren't really handled all that great in this movie. There is build up to their introduction with the two of them racing past Marion, but after that, they just sort of become fan service tools. It is kind of funny how Duck remarks that he hasn't seen them in a while and tells them not to take so long next time, but that's just it. That line was put in there for fan service. And using these characters in ways to just pander to the hardcore fans isn't the right way to use them. The same thing can be said for Daisy, who appears at the very end of the special and only has a single line. Her episodes would go on to be pretty good as well, but this scene was put in the movie for, again, fan service. But sure, you could argue, oh, but Donald and Douglas end up taking the ship to the harbor later on, so they do end up doing something important. Not really. Again, like with my The Adventure Begins review, I'm on the Unlucky Tug side when he uploaded his Sodor's Legend of the Lost Treasure review video in 2016. I totally agree with him that Ryan should have been the one to take the pirate ship, not Donald and Douglas. Ryan doesn't really do much in this movie for us, the viewers, to think of him as an unlikable character. He's just a friendly guy in this movie that Thomas is giving a hard time to just because he got his branch line taken away. I mean, I get why Thomas would be jealous of Ryan for becoming Sir Topham Hatt's new #1, but Ryan isn't really being a jerk back to him or showing off to make himself unlikable. If Ryan was the one to take the pirate ship to the harbor, Thomas would have a reason to dislike him, especially since he was so adamant of getting the point across that he was the one who found it and not Rocky in the steamworks. I also don't necessarily like how the small railway engines were handled in this movie. I mean, don't get me wrong, it was amazing seeing Rex, Mike, and Bert, characters who were previously only in the books before finally making their first on-screen appearances here. And what they ended up doing with them in the show was awesome! Remaking the Railway series stories that they were the stars in, making those episodes to be the first Railway series stories adapted in the series since Mind That Bike. But anyways, I'm getting off topic. The small railway engines in this movie also don't really do a whole lot, and it would have been cool to see maybe just a little bit more of their railway in this movie, but I feel like they were overall handled decently in this. They sing a very catchy song, which is Never Overlook a Little Engine, and they even try to help Thomas stop Sailor John from getting away with the pirate ship in the final chase scene. There's also a funny little subplot with Marion and the small engines where she thinks that the engines are magic, and I'll go into more detail about this when we discuss the good things that were in this movie. But overall, I think that the small railway engines were okay in this. Not exactly great uses of the characters, but just okay. I also do not like Henry in this movie. I mean, sure, he's the one who ends up seeing the so-called ghost boat and tells the other engines about it, and I do really like the flashback sequence where Salty tells the engines all about Captain Callie's and how he hid his pirate ship on Sodor back in the days of pirates. But the other times Henry appears in this movie, yeah. This is what I was talking about in my Adventure Begins video with Warrior Henry. He's only scared in this movie as a light-hearted, funny joke, and it just doesn't work. Also, Henry does absolutely nothing in this movie after Salty's flashback. He never becomes important to the story again. He's just a scaredy cat for comic relief. I kind of agree with the Unlucky Tug that Thomas should have been the one to see Skiff and Sailor John sailing on the rails. It would give him more motivation to work with the two characters, and then it would mean a little more when Sailor John ends up betraying him to get the treasure for himself. But on the other hand, I do kind of like how they chose Henry to be the one to see the ghost boat. I feel like the scene at Brendam where Henry's talking to the other engines about it is a pretty good use of Warrior Henry. He's not absolutely terrified of it in that scene, he's just worried about it because he didn't know what it was that he saw that night. It's sort of like Haunted Henry in a way, but overall I do kind of agree that Thomas should have been the one to see the ghost boat and not Henry. I also think that the pack characters that reappear in this movie are are kind of underused, especially Max and Monty, who don't say anything and only make cameos in this. But that's such a minor nitpick because Oliver is handled great in this, with the whole Marion subplot of believing that Oliver, the steam engine, was somehow turned into Oliver the excavator. It's funny seeing Marion interact with Oliver in this, and the way it concludes where she learns that there are two Olivers is very funny, and an issue that I bet a lot of fans were wondering about for a long time. Now, before I say this next nitpick, let me just say that I know that I'm going to get a lot of people criticizing me for going back on something that I said in a previous video. But anyways, here goes. When Thomas is chasing after Skiff, the shot that they show of Thomas's driver right at the end kind of detracts from the whole chase scene. I mean, it does kind of make sense that they'd stay with Thomas to keep on the lookout for Sailor John, since they were most likely listening in on Thomas's conversation about Sailor John with the treasure. But why show this very unfitting scene of the driver right before Thomas crashes? As unrealistic as this sounds, it would have been cooler if Thomas was driving himself throughout that chase scene, and when he meets up with Sailor John to look for the treasure. Now, I know that I said in my Misty Island Rescue review that the importance of engine crews is what gives Thomas that feel of realism, but there have been countless instances of stories, even in the classic series, where there was no way the plot of the story could happen in real life, like Rusty and the Boulder from season 5 as an example. And believe it or not, there is proof in the series that the engines can drive themselves. Let's take a look at the episodes Off the Rails and Down the Mine as examples, which were both originally stories written by Audrey, keep in mind. In Off the Rails, Gordon moves himself slowly forward to jam the turntable is being turned around on to prevent himself from pulling a goods train. There is absolutely no way that Gordon's driver did that, as why would he willingly pull the throttle and jam the turntable like that? Also, in the scene of Gordon getting turned around on the turntable, if you look really closely, you can see that Gordon's driver and fireman are standing behind him on the turntable, and if you look in his cab, there's nobody in there. So how could Gordon have moved forward all by himself if that's true? The same can be said for Thomas in Down the Mine. When Thomas is at the quarry and the fireman goes to change the points, Thomas puffs forward quickly, throwing both his driver and fireman off the footplate. Again, there's no way that Thomas's driver would have done that. He knows not to pass the danger sign since the episode says that
He had often tried to pass it but had never succeeded.
meaning that his driver would have had to stop him to do so. So how were Thomas and Gordon able to move by themselves in these situations? The answer is simple, and it's the fact that these trains are sentient. These trains are living beings, so of course it seems logical that they should have some free will to move about by themselves. I'm not saying that the engine shouldn't have crews at all. I still think it's a crucial part of what makes Thomas so realistic. But I do think that it would be neat if they showed the engines going by themselves without drivers or firemen, as it would make the concept of a sentient talking train a little bit more realistic. Also, I do really like the whole Never Overlook a Little Engine music video, but about halfway through the song, the visuals get really abstract and bizarre. I mean, I get that this is a music video that is very clearly set outside the reality of the movie, but it's still very strange to see stuff like the small railway engines turning into butterflies and flying around Thomas's face. Also, another thing that's kind of questionable is how in the world did Sailor John get a hold of Captain Callie's ship and bring it all the way up to the top of that hill during the chase sequence? Surely he couldn't have gotten permission to put it there. Was some engine taking it somewhere and they just left it sitting there on top of the hill? How did it get there? And when it tips over, how did that ship not fall apart? Did it get fixed after the chase? Was it left there blocking the line overnight? But anyways, these are kind of just minor nitpicks because the chase scene still works and is really awesome. Also, another small nitpick that I have is that at the end, Sir Topham Hatt said that Ryan told him all about Sailor John. If that's the case, why didn't Ryan tell him about Thomas saving him from getting blown up by the dynamite? He knew that Thomas was trying to save him, so why didn't he let Sir Topham Hatt know that? But that's also a small nitpick because the movie still works really great. Anyways, I think that might just be everything wrong with this movie. So now, let's move on to what the positives of this movie were. Like The Adventure Begins, there's so many positives in this movie that I don't even think that I can say them all. But let's try and do it regardless. Without a doubt, one of the things that really makes this movie stand out is its amazing cinematography. This movie is, in my opinion, the only Thomas special that really feels like a full-blown movie. They took out the big guns for this one. Whether it was the stunning animation by Arc Productions, the amazing magical feel this movie goes for, and holy crap, the shot of Sailor John getting thrown off of skiff holding the treasure is incredible! Jeez Louise, am I still watching a Thomas the Tank Engine movie? And the way the plot builds up to the climax of Thomas chasing down Sailor John is amazing. They have small, insignificant moments such as Marion's subplot with the small railway engines work its way naturally into the main story being told, which is absolutely baffling. The way the plot was written is absolutely fantastic. I can definitely say that this movie has the best cinematography out of all the specials that they've made. Heck, this even beats out Magic Railroad in cinematography, and that movie was actually in theaters. Anyways, I'm kind of getting off topic, so let's move on. Another thing that I really liked about this movie was the subplot with Marion and the small railway engines, which I just mentioned. For one, it's awesome to see Rex, Mike, and Bert finally appear, but the way Marion's subplot with them is approached is absolute genius. In the book that the Arsdale engines appear in, which is called Small Railway Engines, Donald and Douglas say to the other engines that the Arsdale engines bring ballast down from the hills. It then goes on to say that James and Henry believe that the small railway engines must be some kind of magic. This is where Sodor's legend of the lost treasure comes into play. When Marion meets Rex, Mike, and Bert for the first time, she thinks that they are magic engines who will grant wishes to anyone who asks for them. Such a nice little reference to the book that they appeared in, and it's funny to see Marion messing around with Mike trying to get him to grant her wish of wanting to find the treasure. I also really love how this subplot touches on the question that many fans were asking for years. Why are there two Olivers? You of course have Oliver the steam engine that works on the Little Western with Duck, and you have Oliver the excavator who works with Jack, Alfie, and the rest of the pack. I absolutely love how they tackled this, with Marion thinking that Oliver had made a wish to the Arsdale engines to turn himself into an excavator. This whole subplot is just so funny. And then at the end, when the two Olivers finally appear on screen at the same time, is so interesting to see, and the mystery is debunked when Marion says,
"There can't be two Olivers."
Yes, there can.
Brilliant. I absolutely love Marion's subplot in this movie, and Marion herself is just a really funny and quirky character as usual. Anyways, I think I've talked about Marion's subplot for long enough, so let's move on. Another thing that I liked about this movie was just how many famous actors appeared in this movie. Of course, you've got Olivia Colman who plays Marion, but you've also got Eddie Redmayne in this movie. He's appeared in a lot of famous movies, and in this movie he plays Ryan. Then you've got Sailor John, who is played by none other than John Hurt. Yep, that's right. John freaking Hurt. He has appeared in several famous movies, such as in Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, in which he plays as Oxley, and in the Harry Potter movies, Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, and both parts of Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows. John Hurt unfortunately passed away a couple of years after this movie came out, making this one of his last film roles he would ever do. Honestly, he did really amazing with Sailor John, and I don't think that anyone else could have really played him the same way Hurt did. Then you've got Skiff, who is played by Jamie Campbell Bower. He also appeared in Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, but only in the first part. And speaking of famous actors who appeared in the Harry Potter movies that were in this movie, Alfie is played by Nathan Clark, who is in both Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix and Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince. I mean, good grief! Just how much of a budget did Mattel have for this thing? The amount of famous actors who appear in this movie is insane! I also cannot talk about this movie without mentioning its soundtrack. Robert and Peter Hartshorn went no holds barred on this movie, as they actually got a real orchestra to play the soundtrack to this thing. And my gosh, the music in this movie is extremely good. I think that this movie's soundtrack just barely beats out Magic Railroad's soundtrack in my opinion. I just love how they were able to get an actual orchestra to play the movie's soundtrack, as it definitely makes this movie even more cinematic than it already is. I also need to talk about the animation in this movie. I think this is one of the best movies that Arc Productions ever animated, and The Adventure Begins is right underneath it, coming in at a very close second. I mean, just look at this shot! It's beautiful! Just like Hero the Rails, I think that the best parts of this movie animation-wise are the morning shots in this movie, as in both cases these shots are really breathtaking. Also, the crashes in this movie are stellar. These crashes are both animated really well, and are some of the best crashes in the series by far. I think that Thomas's cavern crash is right underneath James's crash from The Adventure Begins. Sure, the cavern crash is cool and all, but it's kinda silly in my opinion. It's still a really good crash, but I like Adventure Begins crash better, as that one is taken a lot more seriously. Another thing that I really liked about this movie was Thomas's character arc. At the beginning of the movie, he's all cocky and cheeky, knowing that he'll always be Sir Topham Hatt's #1 engine. But then when he causes the accident at Knapford, he of course gets very jealous of Ryan taking over on his branch line. He then gets in really big trouble when he falls in the cavern, so he tries helping out Sailor John so that he can feel useful. He causes even more trouble trying to explain that it wasn't his fault, but Sir Topham Hatt does not want to hear it. Then when Sailor John wants to steal the treasure, Thomas chases after him when he gets it and proves himself a really useful engine again. I just love his character arc in this, and I also really love the symbolism with his #1. When Thomas is bragging to Annie and Clarabelle, we get a close-up shot of it, and then when Thomas falls down the cavern, his paint gets all scratched up and dusty so that you can't see his number. And then when Thomas thinks that he isn't the #1 engine anymore, we get a close-up of the dust covering Thomas's #1, similar to the shot from earlier. And then when he proves himself by chasing down Sailor John, he falls into the ocean and the dirt is washed off, revealing his #1 again. And when Sir Topham Hatt says that Thomas will always be his #1, we get yet another close-up of Thomas's #1. The way that this symbolism is handled is so clever, and that also helps the movie feel really cinematic along with all the other things that I mentioned before. I also love how funny this movie is, with of course the quirkiness of Marion's character and the whole subplot with her and the Arsdale engines. And the scene where Sir Topham Hatt sees Thomas trying to save Ryan from the dynamite was also pretty funny, as it sort of looks like Thomas is trying to chase Ryan down with it. And in the We Make a Team Together music video, I like the whole little joke with Sailor John and the shovel. Additionally, the part where the dynamite is lit by Ryan's smoke and the pack tosses it around from one character to the next was pretty funny. But for the most part, this movie isn't exactly all that funny. Sure, there are some scenes here and there that are pretty funny, but this movie is more focused on being a cinematic masterpiece than telling jokes to make the audience laugh. And I appreciate that. Speaking of funny moments, I appreciate that in this movie, Sir Topham Hatt isn't the bumbling, clumsy character that the seasons before and after this movie portrayed him as. He's absolutely 100% serious in this movie. The part where he gets angry at Thomas for losing the dynamite is probably the angriest he's gotten in the series since Duck takes charge. I love how they handled Sir Topham Hatt in this movie, and he definitely feels like the controller of the railway, and not just a character that's used as comic relief. Another thing that I really like about this movie is, again, the subtle references to other Thomas episodes, like how the opening of the movie is very similar to the original intro of the series, with him passing by the famous windmill, going under a bridge, and then stopping at Farquhar at a very similar angle to the original intro. Additionally, in the 70 Years of Friendship YouTube video, drafts from the script of this movie were shown, confirming that the original theme song was supposed to play during the opening of this movie. While this did not happen in this movie, it did happen in the episode the windmill footage at the beginning of the movie was taken from Thomas the Babysitter. Clarabelle saying that,
Well, I know that your passengers don't like being bounced about like peas in a frying pan.
was also a reference to the episode Thomas and Bertie, where the same line is said at the end of the episode. Marion's subplot, as I mentioned, is a reference to the Small Railway Engines book, the engines trying to wake up Thomas, and the narrator saying that
Thomas wouldn't wake up. His fire kept going out, and there wasn't enough steam.
being a reference to Thomas and Gordon. I absolutely love how this comes into play later when he's chasing Sailor John, by the way. Sir Topham Hatt saying that he doesn't want to hear any more of Thomas's excuses, possibly being a reference to the episode Who's Jeffrey, and Thomas being sent to work on the new branch line, possibly being a reference to The Great Discovery, where he had to work at Great Waterton in that movie. I had also seen people talking on Twitter that the shot of Sir Topham Hatt scolding Thomas Thomas after he drops the dynamite down the cavern might be a reference to the earlier seasons, where all close-ups of Sir Topham Hatt showed his large-scale model against the blue sky. The people I'd seen talking about it, though, were joking that normally people in this fandom try to make the craziest of assumptions of things in the movies and assume that they are references, providing what I have stated earlier as an example. Honestly, with how many nods to fans this special has, I wouldn't be surprised if that scene was a reference to the earlier seasons, and if it wasn't, I guess it was just a happy coincidence. The last thing I want to talk about before we move on to the miscellaneous things I noticed in this movie is Sailor John himself. Before this movie, we've either had a diesel engine or a steam engine to be the movie's main antagonist. However, this movie marks a huge milestone for the series, this being the first time a human character is used as the story's main antagonist. This is so crazy to me, knowing that P.T. Boomer would have been one of the first human villains if he ended up appearing in Magic Railroad. Actually, now that I think about it, there are some significant similarities between Sailor John and P.T. Boomer. Both are older characters, both like working with explosives, and both try to stop Thomas from saving the day during a chase sequence. Maybe Sailor John is related to P.T. Boomer in some way, who knows. With that though, I think that might just be everything good that was in this movie. So now let's move on to what the miscellaneous things I noticed in this movie were. Unlike the last few movies, where there was very little trivia on the wiki about them, there is a lot to know about this movie. First of all, when this movie came out in theaters in the UK, John Hurt was knighted for his services to drama by Queen Elizabeth II. She would later go on to appear in the last CGI episode, Thomas and the Royal Engine, being voiced by former writer Sharon Miller. Man, these specials must have some sort of good luck or something attached to them. First, Blue Mountain Mystery, which was released the same year Victor's Basis was rescued from a sugar mill, and now this. Additionally, this special received the EVCOM Screen Awards Gold Award for music. Honestly, I can see why this movie won that award. As I stated earlier, the music in this movie is beautiful. Speaking of this movie's soundtrack, this was the last movie to be composed by Robert and Peter Hartshorn, as Chris Renshaw took their place starting with the next movie, The Great Race. Also, this movie surprisingly aired on Virgin Atlantic flights out of London from the 1st to the 8th of August. You know, I had never been on a plane before until I went to Florida over spring break. While I was on the plane, I watched WALL-E on the way to Florida and Finding Nemo and Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone on the way back. I can only imagine how cool it would be to watch Sodor's Legend of the Lost Treasures or Flying Out of London, where Thomas originally came from. That would be so awesome, and it's a really clever idea. Anyways, moving on. Another thing that I noticed from looking on the wiki was that this is the first special since the episode Thomas and the Special Letter that all of Engines 1 through 11 have appeared on screen in the same special. Meanwhile, Thomas and the Special Letter being the only time all of Engines 1 through 11 have appeared on screen at the same time. The wiki also says that Engines 1 through 11 have appeared in Big World, Big Adventures, making that movie to be the third time this has happened in the series history. Honestly, it's really interesting that this has only happened 3 times in the show total. Anyways, another thing that I noticed was that on the week of this movie's DVD release in the UK, Ben Dowell gave this special a 4-star rating and branded it as the DVD of the week in the Radio Times. Honestly, these awards that this movie got are very well earned, as this is a very solid movie, but not as good as The Adventure Begins was, in my opinion. Another thing that I noticed was that in the 70 Years of Friendship YouTube video, early working titles for this special were shown, those being The Great Treasure Hunt and Legend of the Lost Treasure. Honestly, these working titles are both pretty good, but I think that Sodor's Legend of the Lost Treasure ultimately sounds better. Speaking of that YouTube video, another thing that I noticed was that the Chinese theatrical release of this movie included an edited version of this documentary dubbed into Mandarin Chinese. That's pretty cool, I guess. But the wiki doesn't really clarify if they showed this before the movie or after. I think that showing it before the movie would be the best choice, because then you could see how they made this thing, and then the actual finished product itself. Anyways, let's move on to another thing that I noticed, being that when Thomas arrives at the construction site, He hums Never Overlook a Little Engine just like how he hummed Really Useful Engine in The Adventure Begins, and like how Steven hummed the engine roll call in King of the Railway. So if engine roll call is Sodor's national anthem, and we have no idea what Really Useful Engine could be, what would Never Overlook a Little Engine be? Anyways, that joke is kinda getting old, so let's move on. Another thing that I noticed was that the digital release of this special was slowed down to 24 frames per second, which in turn causes audio distortion. You probably know what I'm going to say next. So instead, I'll let Birdie say how I feel about this.
Typical.
First Blue Mountain Mystery, then King of the Railway, then Tale of the Brave, and now this movie! I thought that Tale of the Brave was going to be the last one with audio distortion problems, so I'm not even going to say anything about it since I practically jinxed myself when I said I was glad that this doesn't happen anymore in my Tale of the Brave review. Anyways, another thing that I noticed that was honestly just a nice little detail was that when Sir Topham Hatt is scolding Thomas for derailing the express coaches, you can see Diesel in the background. And I just absolutely love how he looks all smug as Thomas is getting yelled at. And then when Ryan arrives, he gets all smug again because Thomas was getting replaced. Honestly, it's little details like these that really make me appreciate these movies. Another thing that I noticed was the music that plays when Sailor John sees Donald and Douglas delivering the ship to the harbor. Anyone else think that it sounds very Arabian Nights-esque? And also, in the scene where Marion bumps into Oliver, it's shown that she had her shovel right in Toad's face. Did she just punch Toad in the face? Is that what would happen if Marion was to run into another engine head-on with her shovel? I also noticed that when Donald and Douglas reappear, they have totally different whistles than they did in the classic series. Why did they change them? Probably the same reason why they changed a majority of the narrow gauge engine's whistles in Blue Mountain Mystery, I bet. Anyways, I don't really think that there's anything else of significance to mention about this special, so I think I'll end the video here. This special was definitely a great experience, and is the most cinematic Thomas movie in my opinion. It can't beat out The Adventure Begins as the best movie for me, but this was still a really good movie, and it didn't just feel like they were trying to sell toys. There was actual effort and heart put into making this thing, unlike the next movie. But
we get there when we get there.
This movie was definitely an enjoyable watch, and it is a real treasure. Anyways, that's the end of this video, and make sure to be on the lookout for my review of The Great Race, which is coming up next. Thanks for watching, and make sure to like and subscribe if you want to see more review videos like this one. This is the TSMU fans signing out. Special thanks to my Patreon supporter, Red and Blue Panier 45, and I give an extra special thanks to a patron of mine who has chosen to remain anonymous. If you'd like to learn how to get your name at the end of every new video that I upload, please consider supporting me on Patreon. I've linked it on my YouTube channel's banner.